All right. So before you decide to overlook something, there are a few things that you need to ask yourself. Number one, am I overlooking this behavior to avoid confrontation? There's some people who don't like confrontation, so they just let people walk all over them. They see clear violations of any one of those four categories that I mentioned before, but they allow the behavior to go on because I don't get into confrontation. This may be an easy solution in the short term, but it's detrimental in the long term because it builds resentment. You start to resent the person. And it will also enable the person to continue in the behavior, making it difficult for them to accept the correction later on when it's brought to their attention. When you bring something to somebody's attention from the very beginning, it's easier for them to correct it rather than allowing that behavior to continue and then correct them later on. What is the person going to say when you correct them later on? Why didn't you say anything to me before? I've been doing this for however many years we've been married. You never said anything before. Well, I never said anything before because I was trying to avoid confrontation. Right? You see how silly that sounds? I didn't say anything to you before because I was trying to avoid confrontation. But if you would have said it from the very beginning, then you would have drew your line in the sand. You would have set up a boundary, which is one of the markers of a healthy relationship. One of the markers of a healthy relationship is boundaries. Any relationship, whether marriage or friendship, it doesn't matter. Any relationship that does not have boundaries is toxic. It's unhealthy. Every single relationship has to have boundaries. This is a sign of self-love. This is how you know that you love yourself, is because I set boundaries. I put boundaries in place to protect myself because I love myself that much. So overlooking the behavior, you have to ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm trying to avoid confrontation? If that's the case, that might be good for a short-term solution, but long-term is very detrimental. Number two, how important is the offense? Is it small enough to overlook or is it too serious to overlook? That's a question you can ask yourself. Before you address your spouse the next time, ask yourself, is it small enough to overlook? Or is it too major for me to overlook? Number three, is the offense personal or is it a clear moral right or wrong issue? Why does that even matter? Why does that matter? Is it a personal? Is this something that you just dislike personally? Or is it a clear-cut moral right or wrong, halal, haram issue? Why does that matter?
I think because if it's a moral issue, then it is a serious thing that needs to be addressed, and it shouldn't just kind of be negated. Where it's a personal issue, depending on how serious the personal offense is, you can decide either to overlook it or to address it.
Exactly. If it's personal, you can say to yourself, well, it's not necessarily haram. I personally don't like it. But, and you can decide in that moment whether or not you have some wiggle room, whether to overlook it or not. But when it's a moral right or wrong issue, halal, haram issue, you don't really have much wiggle room to just overlook it. If it's haram, you have to address it. That's part of our deen. Enjoining what is good, forbidding what is evil. We don't have the luxury, when it comes to moral, right or wrong, halal, haram, we don't have the luxury of overlooking it. Number four, by overlooking this behavior, am I hurting the person or am I helping them? If I don't say anything, am I hurting this person or am I helping them? These are just some guidelines to consider, because sometimes we see a particular, and this is especially true at the beginning of a marriage. When two people are first married and they get past like the first stage, the honeymoon phase, they get out of the honeymoon phase and the dopamine, the drugs wear off and you're kind of seeing each other for who you are and you're seeing all of the mistakes and the flaws of your spouse. It's in that moment you are kind of conflicted on whether or not should I say something, should I not say something. As you grow with the person, as you move along in the marriage with the person, you know what to address, what not to address, when to address it. You kind of like by default of living with the person, you kind of figure those things out over time. But at the beginning of the marriage, it's, a year, 2 years, 3 years into the marriage, you still trying to figure out, should you say something? Should you not say something? Should I let it go? Should I not let it go? These are some guidelines to help you make that decision. By overlooking this, am I hurting the person or am I helping them? All right. You see that your spouse is kind of getting up late for Salatul Fajr on a regular basis. They did it once. You didn't really say anything. They did it again. And it's just like, all right, I don't want to break the person. I don't want to come down heavy on the person. But Salat, getting up on time for Salat is that's a value of mine. And now I'm married to this person who is not valuing the Salat. It's getting up late. All right. By overlooking this, am I hurting them or am I helping them? You're hurting them. You're hurting the person. That is something that you can't afford to just overlook. And obviously, sometimes we know that how this person is going to react or respond when we say it, but you got to put on your armor. It is what it is. I can't just let that go. I got to address you about it. And I can see the claws coming out. I can see the gloves getting put on because you're ready to protect yourself. And that's all good. But I need to clear my conscience in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I did my part to address you. All right. It's what's in Arabic is called bara'at dhimma. I'm freeing myself from blame in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I can't just let you do that without saying something to you. All right. Number 5, was the offense intentional or unintentional? That helps when it comes to whether or not you should address it or not address it. Because if it was unintentional, you probably don't necessarily need to say anything because you know that the person didn't do it on purpose. And some of us, we totally disregard all of these guidelines. And it's just like, no, you offended me. You disrespected me. You did this. You did that. And you have no guidelines that helps define your approach. So whether the person says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," it's like, I don't care. You're not going to do that. It's just like, yeah, but I didn't do it intentionally. It was a mistake. So is there no differentiation between what is done intentionally and what is done? Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold us accountable for the things that we do unintentionally? No. We are accountable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the things that we do with the intention. Innamal a'malu binniyat. Actions are based upon intentions. And if your spouse says to you, that's not what I intended, then, you should kind of let up a little bit because the person is clearly telling you that wasn't my aim. That's not what I was aiming for. It was unintentional. Number 6, how often does the person do this? Is this the first time that the person did it? Has the person done it multiple times and you have to address them about it? Husband comes home late for work than usual and you address him. I don't like when you come home late, whatever. It's like, yeah, but how many times have I done this? I had to make a stop. I didn't text. Okay, I could have texted you. But you are approaching me, you're addressing me as if I do this every single day. This was one time. Look at the frequency in which, the person is doing this. Is this something that they did? Your husband or wife might have got angry, upset, and raised the octave of her voice a little bit. And husband might say, who you think you're raising your voice at? You better check that, blah, blah, blah. That's just like, yeah, but how often does she do that? This was the first time out of the 50 arguments you guys have had that she has ever raised her voice at you. And immediately you feel the need to address that. It's just like, she can't get that. One time she can't get that. You gotta nip that in the bud real quick. One of the Sahaba came to the house of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu to complain about his wife. And when he got to the door to knock on the door, he heard Umar's wife yelling at him. And Umar comes to the door and he said, what is your question? And he said, well, I was coming to complain to you about my wife raising her voice at me, but I could hear your wife raising her voice at you. So I'm saying, if you're the leader of the Muslims, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar bin Khattab, then who am I to complain to you about my wife, what my wife does to me? So it's just like, if this is a one-time thing, how often does the person do this? These are guidelines that you can use to help you decide whether or not you should address it or not address it. Number 7, are there bigger issues that I should be focusing on? Are there bigger issues that I should be focusing on? Before you address your spouse about this, ask yourself, are there other issues that are going on between us that are bigger than this that I should be addressing? So I'll give you a scenario. If a man is married to a woman, brother's married to a sister, and she's not wearing hijab. She stopped wearing her hijab. But although not wearing hijab, she also doesn't pray. Fajr goes by, no salat. Dhuhr goes by, no salat. Which one do you address her about? Do you say, babe, I don't like you going outside without your hijab on? Meanwhile, you got up to pray Salatul Fajr this morning. Your wife didn't even budge. She never even rolled over and made an attempt to get up and pray. But before she leaves out for work, you address her about her hijab. I would like to think that salat far more important than the hijab. According to my knowledge and my little bit of understanding of Islam, the first thing that Allah is going to ask us about from our deeds on the Day of Judgment is what? Salah, not hijab. Hijab, it means a lot to us because that's a value as a man, Muslim man who values the hijab. That's a value, right? That's a value. I value the hijab. I made it very clear to my wife when I first married her that I wanted a woman who, observes the hijab, the proper hijab. All right, so somewhere along the line in our marriage, she started to kind of drift away from the hijab. Got it. That's a personal boundary. That's also a value of yours. But also, you have something that is far more important than that, and that's establishing the salah. So you have to ask yourself, before I address my spouse about this, are there other issues, bigger issues that I should be addressing them about? Stop majoring in the minor, minoring in the major. And a lot of couples do that. They spend so much time majoring in the minor. And there are huge things that should be addressed. You have a sister who wants to address her husband about communicating with women on social media. Got it. That's a huge issue. But before you address him about that, you probably want to address him about not making salat. You probably want to address him about the non-practicing Muslims or non-Muslims that he hangs out with, because all of that is connected. He going out to the cigar bar and hanging with his old homies from Jahiliyyah and not making salat, and then you want to address him about talking to women on social media? You addressing the symptoms, not the root problem. You guys follow me? Does that make any sense? Am I making any sense here?
Loud and clear.
So, I mean, it's just, these are just guidelines that you can think about before you decide you want to address. Because sometimes we get caught in this space where we I don't know, should I say something? Should I not say something? I don't really know what to do. All right, so here are some guidelines that you can consider before you decide on a particular action, whether to address it or not to address it. Are you trying to avoid confrontation? How important is this? Is it personal, or is it a moral, right or wrong, halal, haram issue? Right? By overlooking it, am I hurting the person or helping the person? Was it intentional or unintentional? How often does the person do this? And are there other issues that I should be addressing them about? These are just some guidelines to help you navigate when you are caught in this space where you're trying to figure out whether I should say something or should I just kind of let it go. All right. Do you guys think that any of this is helpful?